Hello, and welcome to another tale from the lands of Ashraka. I'm Zeckthar, and without further ado, Chapter 6, A Bolt in the Dark.
Bowden sniffed the air. Something was off. He had left the Magister's villa about 20 minutes ago, hoisting up the slumbering Emily so her head was gently resting on his shoulder. Padding quietly down the streets, he had moved with haste, trying to get to the ship as quickly as possible. Syracuse was no place to be after dark. Not with a little girl, at least. Too many vagabonds, thieves, and looters, hiding around every corner. Normally, this wasn't something that he worried about. Then again, normally he wasn't carrying a 7-year-old girl. A faint smell on the breeze had disturbed his trek. Something was off. Most people would call it their gut, something that gave you pause on a personal level. Bowden always thought it came from his nose. A new smell making his mind not sit right. As he moved around the corner, he broke into a quick run, looking for an alley to duck down, or somewhere to hide. Seeing the corner of a rather large shop, he ducked around the corner. Emily muttered something, yet remained steadfastly asleep. Crouching down, the young Minotaur peered around the corner, trying to decipher if anyone was following him. Heart thumping in his chest, his eyes took in all those on the street. Nothing. Just a few stragglers from evening get-togethers trying to make it home without being hassled themselves. Sighing a little with relief, Bowden was about to stand up when the scent hit his nostrils again. Something was out of place. Frantically, he searched the alley again. His nose had never been wrong before, yet he found nothing. Widening his scope, his eyes went up to the roofs of the buildings. On top of the building to the left of him, a shadow moved.
I see you,
the Minotaur thought with a grin. Normally, he would have simply scaled the wall of the building and pummeled the poor assailant. But this was slightly different. He couldn't leave the sleeping girl behind. Thinking for a second, he crept his head back around the corner.
Best let them move on, then take a different path, the Minotaur mused.
If he had given them the slip, they would of course be waiting for him back at the ship. Yet he would deal with that then.
Getting a little wet never hurt anybody,
Bowden chuckled to himself. He waited a minute, then snuck his head back around for a peek. Bowden frowned. His shadow was still on the roof. Why hadn't he moved on? Then it struck him. He hadn't evaded this hunter. The shadow was waiting for the rest of the pack. Cursing his bad fortune, Bowden gently lowered the sleeping child. Putting his left hand across her mouth, he then poked none too gently in the ribs with his other. Her eyes slid open, and then she felt the hand over the bottom of her face. How wide her eyes opened in terror. Not wanting to frighten his daughter, he put a finger to his lips.
Shh. I will remove my hand if you promise not to make a sound. We are being hunted.
Eyes still bulging, she nodded slightly. Slowly, he removed his hand. Still speaking quietly, he continued.
Very good. Peek your head around the corner and look up to the corner of the building to the left.
Hesitantly, she did as she was told, peering around the corner. She quickly scurried back into the alley, her eyes still holding fear.
You saw him?
The girl nodded. Bowden scooped her up in a quick, comforting hug, and then looked into her eyes, saying with a quiet rumble,
Easy, child. If I am alive, no harm will come to you. You understand? I will protect you.
Emily glanced around the corner, then back at the caring eyes of Bowden. Her breathing began to slow, and her shoulders began to sink, relaxing into a normal state.
Good, but I need your help.
Her head perked up, her eyes eager, ready for the chase. Bowden couldn't help to smile when he said in a hushed tone,
I need you to hop onto my back and grab me around the shoulders with your arms, and around my back with your legs. We'll be moving at a healthy clip, and I do not want you to fall off. Can you manage that, or shall I find some rope?
Eagerly, she quickly used his squatting knee to propel herself onto his back, launching herself across his back with her legs tightly locked around his stomach, and after a few moments trying to get her arms around his massive shoulders, just gave up and gripped onto his horns.
Okay, I'm ready.
A low rumble erupted from Bowden's chest, soothing and encouraging to the young lady that held onto him.
Well done, lass. Then with a roar, he finished, Now hang on!
Bursting from the alley, he darted down the main path, quickly gaining speed. He flashed down the road, darting between the few that were scurrying home after dark, or simply bowling them over on his mad dash. His ear twitched as he heard something crack off the stone wall next to him. Taking a quick glance back, he saw 3 shadowy figures, each with small hand crossbows. Seeing one fire another bolt in his direction, he ducked to the side, feeling its buzz through the coarse hair on his upper arm. Looking ahead of him, his mind raced faster than his legs pumped. He needed to get off the main street and try to find it through the winding turns of the inner workings of Syracuse. The problem was that he would most likely get hopelessly lost, and it would take hours to find his way out. Another bolt struck true this time, hitting him in the upper right shoulder. Emily squealed in horror, and Bovin growled in pain. Without another thought, he darted down an alley to his left, off the main road. The pain in his shoulder was bearable, yet normally those that use the melon luke, or luke for short, lace their bolts with all sorts of horrible poisons, normally designed to sap the strength of the one who was shot. He continued to dart down different alleys. He felt something slowly numbing his right arm. Snarling, Bovin cursed.
Carcass! The damn thing is poisoned. Emily, I need you to pull it out.
Ducking through another alley to the right, he heard another quarrel ping off the wall where he had been before. Emily tightened her grip around his horns and shook her head, far too afraid to do anything. Coming to what looked like a dead end, Bovin noticed at the last second a tiny drainage alley just to the left of the dead end. Digging his left leg into the ground, he made a last-second cut, diving to the side down the alley. 3 more bolts stuck into the dead end as he scrambled sideways down the alley. It was far too thin for him to run through as he shuffled as fast as he could. He couldn't feel his right hand anymore. It simply hung limp at his side. If the bolt remained in him, he would eventually go numb.
Damn it, girl. Pull the bolt out.
Bowden hissed as he shuffled.
If you don't, we both die.
Emily gave a quiet squeak and then tugged at the bolt. Bowden gasped in sudden pain as the girl pulled out the dart. He growled out in acknowledgement as he heard it clatter to the ground. He sidestepped as fast as he could. He only had 15 more feet to go. If the 3 that were chasing him reached the roof that looked down on them, he knew they would surely be killed. 10 feet. He could hear the footfalls on the rooftop. 5 feet. Using his still working left arm, he began to claw at the wall in front of him, pushing himself forward a little faster. His breath coming in ragged gasps now. His brain could feel the bolts being locked into place. 2 feet. He could feel the crosshairs on the back of his neck. Poing! Pulling himself free, he heard the snap of the discharge and felt one bolt slice through his chitin, and he heard another skipping off the road. A third dart rang his bell a wee bit, glancing one of his horns, just inches from his skull to the left, while almost grazing Emily's hand to the right. With a silent thanks to Jupiter, Bovin scampered down the road, trying to slow his breathing, even though it came in ragged gasps. Calming his breathing meant he could run farther, and if there was any chance for them, he needed to keep running. Glancing around trying to find his bearings, he realized they had popped back out onto the main road. His heart jumped for joy. The dockyard was close, only 50 yards to his right. The only problem was the main street wound down towards the dock, giving him another 100 yards instead of a direct 50. Clank! Another bolt skidded off the street. He wasn't going to make it another 50 feet, let alone 100 yards. With a growl, he barked at the little girl straddling his back.
Hold on to my neck. I need my horns.
Instantly, he felt the tiny hands clamp around his neck, cutting a little air from his throat, yet not unbearable. He could live with it for a couple of minutes, which he prayed was all he needed. Scanning the merchant quarters closest to him, he quickly found his target, a rickety-looking old door. Most of the merchants this close to the docks were fishmongers, and they took everything from the sea, including pieces of old ships, that they made into their front doors.
Leveling his horns at the door, he charged, smashing through the door, turning the planks of wood into splinters.
As he burst through the door, he scanned the shop for a back exit, a place to dispose of refuse and take an inventory. His heart sank. No back door, He had led them into a dead end. Thinking quickly, he began thumping on the back wall, seeing if there was a thin spot he might be able to break through the stone. As he thumped, his head was slightly pulled down to the left by the little hand grasping onto his horns. Before he could object, an eerie green light flared behind his head to the right. Bovin snorted in alarm and was about to question when he glanced in front to the walls he was tapping on. Even in the darkness of the lightless shop, it was black. Black as a starless night, as if it had become the void itself. Stunned, Bovin hesitated, touched at the wall, and to his relief, it was still there.
To the left, do you see it?
Emily said excitedly. Shifting his gaze to the left, he could see behind the store, a small alley. Jumping towards the alley, he was stunned when his nose thumped hard into the wall. Glaring back at the little girl for an explanation, the little one simply shrugged.
I can't make holes. I simply can show what's behind walls.
Wiping some blood from his nose, all Bovin could do was nod. Then he lowered his head. Emily, quickly tucking her hands around his neck again, and smashed through the wall. Stone and mortar exploded from the wall as his horns barreled through it. The cloud of stone smoke made it hard to see, and the wall was a little thicker than he expected, ringing his bell. He weaved his way forward out of the dust cloud. Shaking his head to get rid of the stars, he peered out down the alley and groaned. Being a back alley, there were no torches. It was total blackness, other than the gloom of the half moon lighting the roofs, as well as the cap of the alley's way. There was no way to see what was going on. Yet with a smile, he thought to himself,
But again, they can't see where I am.
Calming himself, he quieted his breath as best he could, then whispered,
Quiet, lass. Maybe we can sneak through here.
Keeping his eyes on the rooftop, he inched his way softly down the passageway. Bovin perked his ears for any sound coming from the rooftops, his eyes keen on the corners, looking for his hunters. His breathing calmed slightly, and then he picked something up with his nose. A strange scent, something that didn't belong in the alley. He had already picked up the horrid stench of human refuse and fish guts, as well as the dusty scent of the crushed rubble. This smelled like campfire, with a hint of lilac. Quietly, he sunk to his feet, grasping at the ground until he found a sizable rock. The smell was coming from behind him, the shop.
Light your little fire when I say, but make sure it's as bright as you can.
The Minotaur almost chuckled when he felt the light pat on his head.
Spirit, this lass has spirit.
Slowly, standing, he faced the hall in the merchant shop and cocked back his left arm, ready to throw. Bovin nodded as he started his throw. Light and heat flared up behind him, like a torch burning in a dark pit. The light touched everything, flaring out, striking every corner of the pathway with a warm glow of fire. His hand already moving forward, his eyes locked onto his target, a shadow in the hole in the wall, now exposed in the light. The shadow, no longer a shadow, was an elf dressed in black. A dark cloak covered him, yet his ears perked out over the face mask that he wore. With pale skin, his head was a perfect target. The elf targeted his Luke, but they both knew it was too late. With a flare in the light, Bovin now knew where to throw, and his arm was on a downward trajectory. He loosed. The rock zipped toward the hunter's face, making a wonderful cracking sound. An amused smile almost crept onto his face when a small hand grasped him on his left horn and pulled hard, ramming his shoulder into the wall and bringing him to one knee. Before he could ask the girl what the hell she was doing, two darts struck the place he once was. Glancing up, he noticed the two remaining.
Thanks, girl,
Bovin grunted. Standing to his feet, he began to pick up the speed down the back alley, and then he had the docks in sight.
Keep the light on as long as you can. At least to the docks,
Bovin rumbled as he began to sprint. His adrenaline was starting to rise. He was close. So close. As he burst onto the docks, smashing yet another wooden door, this time with his shoulder. A deep chuckle erupted from his chest. He was almost home. He was almost safe. The thought was shattered as a quarrel struck his left leg. Snarling, he was about to continue his run when he felt the same poison in his left leg that made his arm numb. Turning, Bovin grabbed the closest thing he could find that resembled a weapon, a broken plank of wood.
Better get off, lass. Don't think I can run anymore. You see that ship with the red hull? Good. Well, run to it. Send help.
As he watched her for a second scurry off and then nodded his approval, the lass was safe. If he fell tonight, at least he had done well by his new daughter. Glaring back at the alley, he brought to bear his meager piece of wood, waiting for the hunters to close for the kill. One shadow appeared, exiting the alley. His vision faded in and out through the gloomy moonlight. As the stalker emerged, he pulled a thin, wavy dagger from beneath the blackness of his coat. Snarling, Bovin tried to circle his adversary. That's when his left leg went completely numb. Almost falling, he hopped a couple of times to get his balance on his right foot. Glancing back up towards his enemy, he almost missed the knife, thrusting towards his heart. Dropping the piece of wood, he desperately grabbed at the plunging knife arm, grasping it hard, just inches from his chest. Growling, Bovin stared into the hunter's eyes. They looked slightly panicked. Taking his other hand, the assailant slammed it down on the pommel of the blade, trying to smash it into Bovin's chest. On a human, it would have skewered his prey. Sadly, he was trying to outmuscle a minotaur. It didn't even come close to working. Pushing now with both hands, the knife did not move an inch. Bovin chuckled evilly as he saw something in his opponent's eyes. Fear. Pulling the knife out wide with lightning speed, he slammed his skull into the hunter's head. While most races would simply stun an enemy with such a blow, Bovin smashed the enemy's head like a cantaloupe with his horned skull. The assailant's hand went dead as Bovin felt his forehead squish brain. The blow had killed the elf. Pulling the knife from the dead elf, he glanced at the roofs, looking for his friends. He was not disappointed. 2 crossbows fired at the same time towards his head. He dived out of the way, both quarrels hitting him in the right arm. He didn't feel a thing. Pulling himself into a roll, he came back up on his right foot. He was about to chuckle about it when he felt the poison start to spread. Dropping to his knees as both legs became numb, he watched as the 2 rooftop hunters reloaded. Panic truly struck. Then the dagger dropped from his numb left hand. Now kneeling, staring up at the rooftops, all Bovin could do was move his eyes back and forth, wondering who was to end his life first. The one on the right rooftop scampered down the wall of the building he was on and raced towards his fallen companion. Scowling at Bovin, he began to pull his comrade towards the alley and said loudly to his friend on the rooftop, Zeckthar. Bovin figured out what the elf had said when his friend on the roof loaded another bolt into his luke and aimed it at his heart. His mind frantically said, move. The poison had done its job, and the only thing that still functioned under his control was his eyes. Wide with frustration and terror, Bovin watched as the last elf on the roof pointed his luke towards his chest. This was it. Defiantly, Bovin tried to snarl, tried to move, tried to do something. Yet the poison had seeped into his bloodstream, and he could do none of these things. All he could do was simply die. He glanced back at the elf dragging off the dead. The elf grinned with sharpened teeth and said in a common tongue, 1 down, 1 to go. Chapter 7. Jigs, Gnomes and Knives. Oh my! Malork was having a grand time. While most of the city shut down at night, the dwarven center of the city remained open. A small part of the massive city. It was nice to be in an environment where everyone didn't tower over him. Most of those in Dwarf Town were either dwarves like himself or gnomish folks. They posted their own guards at the entrance of the little town within the city, and Helga informed him that the dwarven cohort roamed the streets in this sector, keeping the peace. A strange policy, yet one that Malork enjoyed. Occasionally he would see from his bar stool a lone figure of a human or minotaur, striding through the court. Yet most folks in the square were under the height of 4.5 feet. Tell me, what is your brother like? Helga asked, bringing back Malork from his contemplations. She had taken him to her favorite watering hole, the Dewdrop Inn. It was a fine establishment, a place that reminded him of some of the bars back home. Shaking his head, Malork chuckled. Which one? Slightly confused, Helga responded, I thought your brother was the Khan. You have more brothers? Aye. 2 blood, 3 of kinship, Malork said before he pounded down the last of his beer. With a bark of laughter, he continued saying loudly, "And pray that they never meet." "Why?" Helga said with a smile. "Well, my blood brothers, Bjorn and Uther, would begrudgingly accept my youngest brother, Kojar. He did, after all, save the world from annihilation." Pausing his conversation for a moment, he waved his empty stein towards the bar winch to get her attention. She scurried over and snagged his empty tankard. As she did, he gave her a broad wink and slid a gold piece into her hand. "Keep 'em coming, lass. Another for the Magister." Glancing at the shining coin, the young dwarf gave him a grin and nodded, and then hustled back to the bar. "Now, where was I? Oh, yes. My other two adopted brothers. Well, let's just say they make myself look like the purest white sheep of the family. Now, one's a full-blooded orc, and the other a poison troll, husband of the high priestess of the whole bloody Karanis." As amused as he was seeing the Magister's jaw drop, something perked his ear. An old jig he hadn't heard in a decade. Nostalgia turned into action. Jumping up from his bar stool, he offered a hand to Helga. "Would you like to have a dance, lass? This song I have not heard in quite some time. One of my favourites, the Rattling Bog. It's a good one to dance to." Looking at his extended hand, Helga chuckled and rolled her eyes. "Great song to dance to. If you're young, the damn thing gets faster and faster as the reels continue on." "That's what makes it fun," Malort chuckled as the waitress returned with 2 full steins. "A wager, then," Helga said with a grin. He looked at both of their steins and returned her grin. "A dancel-dammel for the next 2 rounds?" she asked. "Aye. First to spill a drop loses." She clinked his glass and said, "A done." Both raised their glass and took 1 swig. It was allowed, after all, and then headed towards the dance floor. Before they got there, a rather burly dwarf stopped them and said, "Oi! Sorry, no drinks on the floor." "Dancel-dammel!" Helga boomed over the music. The muscular dwarf rolled his eyes, then held his hand up in a fist. The band began to falter, and then simply stopped playing, much to the chagrin of the patrons. "Oi! These couple have called dancel-dammel. Those who wish to wager, place your bets with the bartender. Those whom wish to participate, the bar won't pay for you breaking your neck. Is that clear?" An eager roar answered him as a mob rushed towards the bar, and a few rushed towards the floor, each holding a cup. Slightly confused, Malork leaned into Helga's ear and hollered, the only way she could possibly hear him. "What's going on?" Helga grinned and roared back. "In Syracuse, we have this thing called Catonium. It allows anyone to partake in the dancing competition. But because you declared a wager, you may pick the song. Would you prefer a different song? Or the same? You must tell the singer." She motioned towards the vocalist, who beckoned him closer. He scooted towards the performer and said sheepishly, "Sorry, sir. I did not know that I would be interrupting your song." The dwarf listened to his words and then gave him a cheeky grin. "Nonsense. I get 10% of the wagers at the bar. What song you wish us to sing?" Malork thought about it for a second. The Rattling Bog was one of his favorites. Yet he wondered. "You know Comin' Ye Clans?" Malork asked. The singer nodded with a wary look and said, "Aye, I know that one. Are you sure that's what you want me to play?" "Aye. Yet after the first chorus, go into Gravel Walk," Malork answered. The musician grinned with the answer and nodded, going back to his pipe player. He then came back to the front of the band and hollered out, "All right, you lads and lasses. A dance for demo has been called. To use that are dancing, remember, first drop that hits the floor loses. All right, a 1 and a 2, and a here we go! Ha ha!" The band started in on Comin' Ye Clans, a fun song by an old bardic group from the deep north of the Ice Kaiser called the Hibernica Rovers. The singers sung the chorus well in a loud baritone. Come in, I'll do the best I can. Come in, bring your whole bloody clan. Take it slow and easy, and I'll shake you by the hand. Sit you down, I'll treat you decent, I'm a decent dwarfish man. Oi! At the end of the chorus came a loud cry from the back of the stage. The music stopped for half a second, and then the piper proclaimed, "All right, lads, a 1 and a 2. Then The piper was off. Not a dwarvish tune, a British one, yet a jig all the same. Helga seemed confused at first, as Malork skipped his feet along to the jig around her, laughing loudly. I suppose he is just going to give up. Come on, lass, feel the reels in your feet. Scowling at the dwarf dancing around her, Helga started to listen to the music. The bagpipes weren't traditional to the dwarves, yet it was a favorite instrument amongst the sturdy race. Listening to the tune, bobbing her head to the music, Helga grinned and let out a ha! She started her dance in a twirl, clinking her glass in tune with Malork's when she came full circle. Shocked, Malork watched, fairly impressed. To the fury, Helga Jenska's feet zipped and thumped across the wooden floor. Shaking his head with shock, Malork grinned and slammed his right foot into the wooden dance floor, sparking off a jig of his own. The two dwarves spun and twirled around each other, their feet getting faster and faster, in time, of course, to the second tune Malork picked, known throughout the highlands of Brighton as Gravel Walk. Grasping hands, the two began to twirl, faster and faster, the drinks in their hands centered with the speed of their circling. Malork was having the time of his life. Then, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Instead of looking the fair maid in the eyes, watching the enjoyment, as well as the concentration, he began to scan the room. Something was off. Adrenaline kicked in. The room began to slow. Every time he spun around, his eyes scanned the patrons, desperately trying to find what was upsetting his gut. The third time he zipped around, he caught it. A gnome in a dark green cloak, standing on a table at the far end of the establishment. He was aiming a broad-tipped crossbow at the dwarf, slyly smiling at the kill yet to come. Through the cheers and loud music, Malork silenced the nonsensical fun, focused on the gnome. Even through the uproar around him at the tavern, he heard the click of the crossbow bolt locking into place. Well, wasn't that exciting? What will happen with Malork? What will happen with Helga? Well, tune in next week with Chapter 8, Harbinger of Death. If you enjoyed these chapters, feel free to like, follow, and subscribe. And if you really enjoyed this, feel free to support us on our Spotify channel or our YouTube channel,
Tales of Asheraka.
Have a great day. And as always,
Until next time, this is Zeckthar, signing off.